I look like one of the McDonald's characters. That was a good look for me.
There you go.
Finally formal.
If you look at the big, beautiful bill.
That was one of the worst, best days of my life.
Take your 10 grand out, but I don't follow my advice for some reason.
Nobody does.
I'm
You're
really
human.
terrible at it. So the boot of the government's on the neck of the industry.
If you're 100% in Bitcoin, which some people
do you
say
not?
that they are, how do you live?
Let's go.
So what do you want to talk about?
Well, at the Bitcoin conference, are we going to talk about XRP?
So funny, you were downstairs and you said, my net worth's 80% in Bitcoin. So don't get mad at me because I'm working on the other 20%.
Right.
We're still in a world where like 80% isn't enough for the hungry, the angry lions.
Scott, it's funny. I just looked at on X and I saw someone say to your post where he said something about favorite people on stage.
Yeah.
And someone was like, why is the XRP guy at a Bitcoin conference? And I replied, 80% of my net worth and running against the politician who wanted to ban self-custody of Bitcoin is not enough for you? So,
It's weird. I feel like it's shifting though.
It is.
Like 4 or 5 years ago, they really were out for blood, but I feel like now, 80% is sufficient, and maybe they'll appreciate the efforts. The funny thing is, though, it's strange you would be considered the XRP guy, because it was never about the asset.
No, it wasn't. In fact, when I sued the SEC, I had way more in Bitcoin, obviously, and I even had, at that time, like 4 times more in ETH. I only had 3, Bitcoin, ETH, and XRP. And at that time, I was really selling altcoins to buy more Bitcoin, right? It was just about government overreach. The government shouldn't tell you what you can own. They shouldn't pick winners and losers. You don't let something trade for 7.5 years and then all of a sudden say it's illegal. And then we saw it play out because a lot of people were hoping it was a one-off, right? It was just Ripple related or it was XRP related. And then we saw the spot ETF Bitcoin get denied, which took an appellate court to say that they were arbitrary and capricious. And so I think generally, even Bitcoin maxis were like, okay, the government's a bad actor sometimes, and it's okay if someone fights them, so it's cool.
Have you found that you actually get support and respect for having beat the SEC, even though it wasn't on behalf of Bitcoin? Because there's some cognitive dissonance there, right? Because
there is.
There were the Bitcoiners who cheered for the SEC because it was Ripple.
Right.
But the same ones would tell you that you should opt out of the government entirely and buy Bitcoin. So how does that make any sense?
A lot of times it doesn't, but my whole feeling was that the tribalism is fine as long as it's not the government telling us what we can buy and what we can own and what we can't own. But yeah, there's still some people who view it as, oh, you helped Ripple or you helped XRP. And I go, no, to me, it's fighting the government, fighting the Elizabeth Warrens of the world is the honorable thing to do. And but there's always going to be some people like that person, like, why is a shitcoiner on the stand because he helped XRP? But listen, I think 80% and going against her is enough to prove that I like this asset.
She's still out there, man. Did you see her in the stablecoin on the floor?
Oh, she's counting votes. She was so invested. She was arguing with Senator Gillibrand, and she thought she could stop that stablecoin legislation. And when they backed off initially, she gained more momentum, thinking she could stop it. And the reality is the stablecoin really isn't that big of a crypto bill. It really is a U.S. dollar dominance bill. If 99% of all stablecoins are U.S. dollar based, that's probably going to continue. And then if the federal law can say this is what is required to gain access to the greatest financial market in the world, it's still the United States. You're going to have US dollar based, you're going to have whatever parameters they set. So it really shouldn't be controversial. The fact that we initially thought stablecoin legislation might not happen was scary, because that's the easy one. Then you got market structure bill. We need some consumer protection. We need bankruptcy protection for centralized exchange accounts. If Obviously, I don't think Coinbase is going bankrupt or cracking or anything like that. But if they did, my account, your account should never be considered property or assets of the centralized exchange to go to their creditors. It should be yours. So making sure that there's segregation of funds, 100% reserves, and bankruptcy protection is something we desperately need.
I happen to have some personal experience with that, having gone through the Voyager bankruptcy,
Yeah.
obviously, and there's still no clarity even there. And I've had a lot of lawyers dealing with this, sadly, on whose assets they are. They've made the claim that the assets aren't mine in the first place.
Right.
They were lost by Voyager. They were Voyager's assets.
Yeah, and imagine a centralized exchange like that gets very aggressive and makes some really bad decisions for loans. You shouldn't punish it. Whether you've got $500,000 or $5,000 in a centralized exchange account, it should never be considered the property or assets of that centralized entity. That's something that we definitely need passed. And if they're struggling on stablecoin, which is just really reinforcing the dollar's dominance in this new technology, then how difficult it's going to be to get more complex legislation.
Yeah. Just thinking, if in all of our conversations I've ever asked you how you actually got into Bitcoin in the first place. I think everyone thinks your genesis story is being the XRP lawyer, but you just said you were already 80% in Bitcoin effectively before any of that even happened. So what got you into it in the first place?
It was 2016. I heard my daughters, my oldest, Olivia and Jordan, were in high school. And I started reading about the Bitcoin, read the white paper. It literally got emotional because, my story, welfare and food stamps. My mother could not keep a bank account because this is in 1970s and 80s. So it would be a physical hard welfare check. She couldn't keep the minimum deposit, so the bank would hit her with the predatory fees. That's how they treat poor people, right? We're gonna hit you with more money fees, money you don't have. So my mother, if you ever go in the inner city, you'll see check cashing stores on the corner, say liquor, check cashing, Lotto, Western Union. So my mother would go there, and I remember her debasing herself, man, like begging, please, can you take 10% instead of 15%? Imagine, so I would watch her beg them, and then when I went to college and I would send her money when I could, I'd send her $100. They'd have to go through Western Union. They take 12%. So if I'm sending her $100, she gets 88. And my mother, God bless her, she could stretch $12 with some pinto beans and potatoes and cornbread. So I thought of mom. I thought of unbanked people. I thought of capitalism being spread across the world. You could be in Nigeria, have a smartphone and a website, and you don't need a bank. You don't need an intermediary. I thought of migrant workers who could avoid the Western Unions and the MoneyGrams and be able to send money directly. And so I thought of poor people and lifting people out of poverty as an example. And the more I read about it, the more I thought that Bitcoin and digital assets represented the new American dream to me. When I was young, you bought a house. Maybe you are lucky you buy a couple stocks. You own maybe a rental property. But people are being priced out of that. You can't afford a house, today. Regular people, young people can't move out. Old people are forced to leave certain states. And so I view it more as an opportunity. Think about tokenization. You can't afford a home, but if you live in an apartment building, it gets tokenized. You could be a renter and have a fractional ownership in the building in which you live. So there's all these ways of where I think that we could attack the wealth gap, because I honestly believe that the wealth gap is at a stage now where it's going to trigger civil unrest and all of those things. It's, I believe, the biggest sort of factor or risk that we have in our country today.
It's interesting, though, because you can understand Bitcoin and you can say, this is a superior way to send my mom money without buying, putting 80% of your net worth into it. So there's still a gap there into where you said, hey, I understand this incredible use case, I'm going to use it, or I'm going to own some, but you basically went all in.
Yeah, I did. And I did it before Saylor. I did it. But we if you count the year I graduated law school was 1995. A dollar is now worth 50 cents. So the purchasing power of the dollar. You cannot continue to debase your currency. When I was young, they talked about millions. When I got in college, these government programs would cost $4 billion, $10 billion. Now they talk about trillions. If you look at the big, beautiful bill, it's going to add $4 to $5 trillion of deficit over the next 10 years. So what are we going to go from 36 trillion? We're going to be at 41 trillion. And these politicians, they can't resist it. The printer is an addiction, man. It's like heroin to people in politics, leaders. They just can't prevent themselves. They're not going to talk about Social Security, right? So my 6-year-old daughter should not have the same Social Security program that her father has. There should be some kind of way that we work on that. We have to do something, but these politicians refuse to do it. They just keep kicking it down the can. So I thought that instead of owning dollars, I'm gonna own Bitcoin. And now 5 years ago when I did it, I thought it was riskier than it is today. I think today there's a stronger argument to do it than it was back then, because who would have envisioned the President of the United States establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, not one that just says hodl the Bitcoin we have, but acquire Bitcoin in a budget neutral way to 2 Bitcoiners, the Treasury Secretary, the Commerce Secretary. Who would have envisioned that? Who would have envisioned a Senate bill that, maybe it gets the votes, maybe it doesn't, but Loomis bill that's saying acquire a 5% of Bitcoin. When you look at all the institutional FOMO that's going on, it's almost stupid not to at least have some exposure to it, as far as I'm concerned. You don't got to go 80%. You don't have to be me, right? But how do you not look at, if you're a financial advisor, how do you not say to someone, listen, you really need to at least put some of it. If you have 10 grand, how do you not put 1,000 in Bitcoin to invest? If you have 100,000, how do you not put 10,000? You know what I mean?
What you said is really interesting, because I've heard it repeated now quite a few times. Matt Hogan, I think from Bitwise, was one of the first said to me, he said, I think right now is the best risk-adjusted time to buy Bitcoin. He's like, it's actually relative to its chance of going to zero, this is the best price you could have ever bought. Because when you did it in 2016, even if it was 3 grand, 1,000, 1,500, whatever it was still in that it could go to zero phase. At least people believed it. And the government could ban it, or any of the what we've seen to be false narratives, but back then you were really rolling the dice.
It was, and it was probably too risky for my age, right? Because I'm 57, so you're talking about I'm in my early 50s. If we're going back to that, maybe late 40s, around that 50 age, I probably shouldn't be that aggressive. But when you go from extreme poverty, you don't worship money. At least I don't, to the point it was like, well, I'm a talented guy with my law practice. If I lose it, I'll just have to work harder and make it again. And so, but it was a faith that, there were days, don't get me wrong now, I'm not pretending that in March of 2020, for example, when Bitcoin went to what, 3,700 or something like that?
Yeah, depending on the exchange.
And I'm, was I like this? Yes. Was I, have some sleepless nights thinking that, shit, I just ruined my kids' inheritance or college education. What's wrong with you? So I had those moments. I'm not going to pretend I didn't.
That was one of the worst, best days of my life, because I had that exact same feeling. But weeks before that, I had set bids on Bitcoin at $4,000 I never thought would fill.
Wow.
And I literally was like, it's never going there.
Right.
But if it ever does, I want to buy it. But I went to bed and Bitcoin was $6,000, and I woke up and Bitcoin was $6,000. And I hadn't checked the price. In 12 hours, it went from 6 to 38 back to 6. And I filled, and then I was up 50% when I woke up.
Right.
Unlike the biggest bids. But you know what I did? I sold half of it. Being honest, right? I sold half of it because I just made 50% on my money. I'm taking out half of it and I'll ride the rest of it. That was probably the only time I can recall that I
that's smart.
made a decision to sell Bitcoin, because I was in such shock that while I was sleeping, I had made 50% on my money.
Well, the reason I'm, we're in the arch public thing, the reason with those guys, because I preach what you did. I tell them all listen, you put 10 grand in, take your 10 grand out, but I don't follow my advice for some reason.
Nobody does.
I'm
You're
really
human.
terrible at it. So being able to set that in a way that you participate. So you should. I'm sitting here saying to myself, okay, you and I were talking about it earlier. What price should I take some profit? Is it 180? Is it 160? Is it 200?
The grand wizards of Bitcoin maxism are not going to take kindly to you talking about selling. You're not allowed to do that.
Well,
sarcasm. You can tell it. It's
well,
fine.
I have a 6-year-old, so maybe putting her college money away would be nice. You know what I mean? So
if you're 80% in, you still have to live.
Yes.
There's people that's what I like. I don't understand. If you're 100% in Bitcoin, which some people say that they are, how do you live?
No, that's true. And I'm not one where I'm gonna like loan it out. I'm not a leverage guy. So although I did leverage like on Schwab with like Apple stock and some of that, I've never really leveraged traded Bitcoin or any other crypto. And so I'm not someone who says, okay, maybe I should, right? The conventional wisdom would, take a loan out on my Bitcoin holdings, I'm 80% in and live off that. But I don't know, I haven't done that yet. Maybe I should, I don't know.
That's the future though. And obviously the previous iteration of it was predatory and all of those blew up, but that is coming to Schwab.
It is.
Right, I mean, so every wealthy person knows you buy, borrow, die, and you never sell anything, and you never take a taxable event, right? But you've never really been able to do that with Bitcoin. I can tell you anecdotally, a friend of mine, and I didn't know existed, moved all of his money to Robinhood, because one of our close friends is now the number 2 guy at Robinhood. He sold his company to Robinhood. And he was able, and I've never even heard that this was possible, with his crypto sitting on Robinhood with his stock portfolio, was able to take a 50% LTV loan, including on his Bitcoin, at 5% and pay his taxes without selling anything. I had never heard of a place where you could have your stocks and crypto, spot crypto, not ETFs, blended and do exactly what you're talking about, like on Schwab. So that's actually here, and nobody's even talking about it.
No, it's not.
We got Vlad from Robinhood here. I'm going to ask him about it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But that already exists, so you can't tell me that's not coming to every financial platform in the world.
Of course, I'm a Schwab customer. I guarantee it'll be Schwab. Now they're obviously talking about they're going to have active trading. The CEO of Schwab said he regrets not getting into Bitcoin earlier. And so, I was on stage with Andrew earlier. We were talking about this institutional FOMO that we're basically witnessing, not retail FOMO, right? But institutional Bitcoin FOMO. And so no, I believe it's today much safer than it was when I did that risky move. And people, my daughters would even say, "Dad, are you that strong believer?" Dad, what's your health like? Right?
I bet they had to check the pulse.
Like that's, but when you're a believer, you're a believer. And so, but it's funny because we start this conversation with the maxis saying, a guy who put 80% of his net worth in 2016 in Bitcoin shouldn't be at the Bitcoin conference because he fought the government and it had to do with a token called XRP. To me, that's stupid.
That fundamental tribalism just blows my mind. It's in everything.
It is.
It's in your sports, and
it is.
Religion and nationalism and your token. It's all the same thing, but still it just blows my mind. You literally were fighting the SEC.
Yeah, but at the same time, if I can earn money or build wealth for my family, for my children and myself, and why would you be against that? Is what I'm saying. Because so do you not if I buy Microsoft stock, do you have a problem because Bill Gates is Bill Gates? You know what I mean? I was trying to explain that to, my daughters graduated USC a couple years ago, my oldest, and she's a lot more liberal than her dad. And she's buying an electric car. And I'm like, well, you should buy a Tesla, honey. She's like, I'm not buying a Tesla, Elon Musk, right? I'm like, well, what about the 140,000 US workers at Tesla that you're supporting? It's not Elon Musk, but we live in this kind of tribalistic identity, politics, divided world that's crazy to me.
So I've seen you publicly use Arch Public for XRP. Are you using it for Bitcoin too?
Yep, Bitcoin, have Solana, trade algo on Solana, XRPs, and Bitcoin.
How do you determine sort of your personal allocation to each as a function of your percentage? Because obviously if you're 80% in Bitcoin, you know that you're most heavily in that. Like, how do you play altcoins mentally into the percentage of your portfolio?
What I did is, and to the guys at Arch Public's credit, Andrew and Tillman, because, you know, just like you get it, you know, they didn't approach me. A friend, Todd, approached me. He was really, they didn't approach me. He was talking about what he was doing at Arch Public. You know, but whenever you have a little bit of status, you know, people will say, oh, you're shilling, you know, this.
I saw it.
You're shilling that, right? And so I said, listen, I'm fascinated by this because I'm someone who's never going to give up, you know, not talking about exchange, but I'm not going to loan out. I'm not going to do the Celsius BlockFi thing. I'm not a huge leverage guy, but I've owned Bitcoin since 2016. And I've never really made money on it other than price appreciation, and then sometimes not so much of price appreciation. So how can I earn money passively? Sort of like rental property, right? How can I own money without giving up access to my crypto or loaning it and all that? And so I told those guys, listen, I'm gonna do this, but I'm gonna be public about it, and I'm gonna be transparent, and I'm gonna give the results, whether they're great, mixed, whatever. And to their credit, they were like, do it. You know what I mean? Absolutely. And so, but Dan and them helped me with setting the algos up and stuff. But I got to tell you, it is great getting an email in the morning from Gemini or TradingView that says, oh, you know, your algo trade I bought at 2 in the morning. Or I was in court and I come out of court and I sold a little, which I would have never done. So I'm a big proponent, and my whole approach is if you can give products to regular people that have been excluded, primarily, right? The Galaxies, the Coinbases, the hedge funds, the A16Zs of the world, they get this stuff. Regular people have been excluded from it, and you can improve their lives, help them build wealth, attack that wealth gap that we were talking about, and make money, then Jesus, that's what capitalism is all about, you know, and that's a beautiful thing. So I'm a big proponent right now of it, for sure.
So I got to ask you, we talked earlier about Elizabeth Warren being out there trying to whip the votes, and she still seems to have a little more power, I think, than we would like. There is a world where the Senate flips and she becomes the head of the Finance Committee again.
She does.
Very soon.
She does, and that's why I'm hoping. You know, when you and I first talked after the election, you know, what's frustrating is we go from one extreme to the other, but no real reform is done. So the boot of the government's on the neck of the industry. The spot ETF, Coinbase is given an IPO 2 years later. They're an illegal business allegedly, right? All this nonsense going on to Trump meme coin and strategic Bitcoin reserve. But are we getting real reform? Because once the Senate flips, and it'll eventually flip again.
Everything flips.
If there's a new president and she has a lot of say, like she did the last president before President Trump, then we're going to go back to square one. And so we really need this opportunity. We need that stablecoin legislation. We need a market structure bill. We need those consumer protections to get done, because then if it flips, you won't be able to just undo an executive order. It's legislation. And once it's in there, you know, I think it'll be very difficult to go back to the old anti-crypto army days if we get that done.
Would you ever run again?
If there was a path to victory. I ran against her. It was February 1. No one was stepping up. She had her bill was banning self-custody of Bitcoin in the United States, gaslighting the world. I knew the chances were slim to none, but I stepped up. I want a path to victory.
You didn't just step up, you spent $1 million of your own money to start.
True. And it did feel good to stand on stage and call her corrupt to her face. So
worth every penny.
It was worth
those debates.
It was just seeing her face.
Oh my God, you murdered her.
When I brought up Epstein and all that stuff, just looking at her face, told her she sucked to her face. It was fun. But if there's a path to victory, there was a poll that showed that a group of people want me to run again. They paid for a poll, and it showed that I could beat Ed Markey between 3 and 7 points if I run. But I wouldn't run if President Trump didn't support it for me, and supported someone else. I'm not going to run against the president. You know, I'm not going to run against, especially on policies I support, because the primary in Massachusetts is September. So what you end up doing is I won the primary by 65% last time. I had 800 grand left in the bank. She had 25 million, and I got 9 weeks to try to win a general. You can't. So if the president was on board, you know, with my candidacy, and there was no primary opponent, sure, I would absolutely run, because I'm not young, but first year Ed Markey went to Washington, D.C., I was 9. So you can imagine the campaign ad will be him in that year and me, you know, holding a teddy bear or something.
Well, I can't wait to see it, man. Thank you so much for everything you do, man.
Thanks, man.
Really
Oh, wait a
appreciate
minute, I forgot to give you.
Oh, God, what happened?
Here we go. You got to dress you up.
Oh, come on, man.
There you go.
I look like one of the McDonald's characters. That was a good look for me.
There you go.
Finally formal.
My gift to you, brother.
Thank you. I'm going to wear it the rest of the day, aka the next 5 minutes.
Thank you.
This incredible conversation was recorded live in the Arch Public Lounge at Bitcoin Las Vegas. To dollar cost average into Bitcoin efficiently and to check out all the other algorithms, go to archpublic.com.
That's dope.